I never imagined that the day would come when I'd be forced to confront the monstrous betrayal lurking behind our front door. I was returning home on an errand, simply going back to grab my bag that I'd left in the study, when I noticed something amiss. As I pulled into our driveway, my eyes caught sight of a sleek, unfamiliar car parked in the lot. It was not our car. In that split second, a cold realization began to seep into my bones. My wife, Mary Ann, had been lying to me. I slowed down, the engine's purr fading into a tense silence as I stared at that car. It wasn't merely a vehicle, it was a declaration. It signified a secret rendezvous, a hidden chapter in the story of our marriage that I had believed was based on mutual respect and love. Yet, here it was, glaring at me with the audacity of someone who dared to trespass into my life without remorse. I stepped out of the car, my senses on high alert. Every instinct told me to proceed cautiously, but a deep-seated confidence, forged by years of suppressed anger and betrayal, urged me to take control of the situation. I walked up the driveway with a slow, measured gait, mentally rehearsing the confrontation I knew was inevitable. With every step, memories of her lies, her sweet smiles that concealed venom, her polished charm that hid her cruelty, echoed in my mind. Inside the house, the atmosphere was thick with a tension I couldn't ignore. The living room, once a sanctuary of shared dreams and laughter, now felt like a stage set for a tragedy I'd only just begun to comprehend. I found Mary Ann in the kitchen, a cigarette dangling from her lips, her eyes cold and calculating. The moment our gazes locked, I saw the flicker of guilt, a brief, almost imperceptible glimmer, but quickly replaced it with defiance. "Mary Ann," I said evenly, my voice betraying none of the turmoil swirling beneath the surface. "Care to explain how a stranger's car finds its way onto our property?" Her laugh was sharp, dismissive, a sneer that cut deeper than any blade. "Oh, come on, Charles," she spat, exuding a rudeness that bordered on insolence. "You always overthink everything. That's just Dave's car. Our friend, isn't he? You're just being paranoid." Paranoid? The word stung, not because it was untrue, but because it was a feeble attempt at dismissing what I had seen with my own eyes. I stepped closer, my eyes never leaving hers, and in that moment, I felt the weight of every lie she had fed me. I wasn't the naive man she once thought to fool. I had come prepared, armed with the truth that would soon unravel her deceit. "Dave," I echoed, the name rolling off my tongue with bitter irony. "You expect me to believe that? The way you talk, the way you hide things. There's more to this story than a mere friend's visit. And frankly, your choice of excuses is as pathetic as your taste in men." She scoffed, flicking ash from her cigarette with a disdainful air. "Oh, spare me the lecture, Charles. Maybe if you weren't so obsessed with finding faults in every little thing, you wouldn't be here stumbling over your own insecurities." Her words were barbed, intended to wound, and for a moment I wondered if she'd always been capable of such cruelty. But beneath her snide remarks simmered the secret she had guarded so carefully, the evidence of her betrayal. As I reached into my jacket, not for my bag but for the small recorder I had planted months ago, a silent witness to her indiscretions, a small smile crept across my face. Yes, I had known for a long time. I had seen the hidden messages, the hushed phone calls, the late-night rendezvous. And now, in the glare of that unwelcome day, I was finally ready to reclaim my power. I took a measured breath and continued, each word deliberate. "Mary Ann, I've heard enough of your lies. I know about the late-night meetings, the secret calls. I know you've been playing both sides, smearing my reputation, betraying my trust, all while masquerading as the perfect wife." Her eyes darted, a flash of panic beneath the veneer of arrogance. She began, but her voice faltered under the weight of undeniable evidence. I stepped back and let silence fall over us like a guillotine waiting to drop. In that heavy pause, I could almost hear the ticking of time, the countdown to the reckoning that had been months in the making. The truth was no longer hers to hide. Every lie, every cruel word, every stolen moment of betrayal was now mine to expose. And as I stood there, a storm of calculated fury gathering behind my calm facade. I knew that the game was about to change irrevocably. The day had begun with a simple errand, but it was now morphing into a turning point, a moment where the scales of justice would tip in favor of a man scorned. The evidence was in my hand, and the betrayal was laid bare. Marianne might have thought she was untouchable, but I had discovered her darkest secrets, and I was ready to exact a revenge so cold and brutal that no one would ever dare cross me again. And so, with my mind steeled for the next phase, I left her standing in that charged silence, the taste of retribution already sweet on my tongue. This was only the beginning of the end of her reign of lies, a beginning that promised an unraveling of truths and a vengeance that would leave no stone unturned. I left Marianne in the suffocating silence of our ruined home with more than just bitter memories churning inside me. Every lie she'd ever uttered was now a brick in the fortress of my resolve. I drove back to my car with a calm that belied the storm raging within. Tonight, the stage was set for the next act, a confrontation that would not only expose her treachery but also begin the systematic dismantling of the life she'd built on deceit. I had spent months meticulously collecting every scrap of evidence, recordings, photographs, messages, each a testament to her double life. But as I reviewed the data in the dark solitude of my study later that afternoon, I discovered something even more sinister. There was a series of encrypted emails, hidden in the mundane chatter of her day-to-day, hinting at collusion not only with Dave, but with a shadowy figure in the world of corporate fraud. It was clear that Marianne's betrayal was only the surface of a far larger scheme, a twisted network of lies that had seeped into every corner of our shared existence. Determined to uncover every layer of her treachery, I began piecing together her secret alliances. The lover's car had been my first clue, a symbol of a covert relationship that she had so arrogantly attempted to dismiss. As I dug deeper, I discovered that the man behind that car wasn't Dave at all, but an accomplice in a high-stakes embezzlement operation targeting our joint investments. My wife, always the silver-tongued temptress, had been playing a dangerous game, balancing on the edge of betrayal and criminality. My plan for retribution was evolving. It wasn't enough to confront her and let her feign innocence any longer. I needed to force her hand and expose her to those who could make her life unravel. I recalled a series of clandestine meetings she'd attended in our city's upscale district. That evening, armed with the evidence I had gathered and the cold determination to reclaim what was rightfully mine, I decided to pay one of these meetings a visit. I tracked her movements with an unerring precision, shadowing her to a chic, dimly lit lounge on the edge of downtown. The establishment exuded an air of illicit sophistication, a place where secrets were currency and every whispered conversation carried a weight of treachery. Sliding into a secluded corner, I observed her from a distance as she engaged with a man whose eyes flickered with both charm and menace. Their conversation, laced with subtle innuendos and the clink of expensive glassware, confirmed my suspicions. This wasn't a mere dalliance but an orchestrated performance. I waited patiently until the meeting concluded. Once alone, I stepped forward and confronted them with a confidence that cut through the murmur of the lounge. "I'm afraid the facade ends here," I said, my voice as icy as the steel of the knife hidden in my jacket. The room fell silent. The man's features contorted into a mix of anger and disbelief, while Marianne's eyes widened momentarily, a flicker of the guilt she'd so desperately tried to conceal. "You always thought you could control everything," she sneered, attempting to reclaim her composure with biting sarcasm. "But you're just a pathetic, jealous husband." Her words, intended to belittle me, only fueled my resolve. I reminded myself that tonight was not solely about exposing her to the world. It was about sending a message that betrayal came with a price I was more than willing to exact. As the confrontation escalated, the man tried to interject, but I silenced him with a single, steely glare. "I'm not here to make idle threats," I declared. "I'm here to collect debts owed in full. Yes, you, Marianne, have stolen far more than just trust. You've stolen everything from me, my pride, my dignity, my future, and tonight, I'm beginning to reclaim every stolen moment." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a flash drive, evidence of her complicity in the fraud that would undoubtedly bring down several powerful figures. "This isn't just about our marriage," I said, my voice low and menacing. "It's about justice, and justice is about exposing the truth, no matter how ugly it is." In that moment, the facade of the lounge shattered. Marianne's mask of confidence cracked, and for the first time in months, she admitted in a near whisper, "Maybe I did more than you think." But even that confession was laced with defiance, a final attempt to salvage some semblance of control. Her admission, however, was a trap that I had already set. I had secretly recorded every word, every hesitation, every lie. Before she could react further, I signaled to an old acquaintance who had once been a trusted enforcer in my quieter days. A man whose reputation for delivering cold, calculated justice was legendary. The accomplice approached silently, his presence sending a clear message. I was not alone in my pursuit of retribution. Together, we escorted Marianne and her associate out of the lounge, the tension thick enough to choke the very air around us. Outside, under the harsh glow of streetlights, I handed them over to an authority I had discreetly arranged. A man whose ambition for cleaning up corruption was matched only by his willingness to employ ruthless methods. As the door closed behind them, Marianne's eyes met mine one last time. In that silent exchange, her bravado crumbled, revealing the true cost of her lies. I knew that this was only the beginning. Tonight's events were a precursor to the unraveling of a web of deceit that had cost me dearly. The taste of revenge was bittersweet, yet it empowered me with a sense of cold, calculated purpose. With every secret exposed and every accomplice revealed, I was one step closer to ensuring that no one would dare betray me again. As I walked away from the chaos I'd orchestrated, I couldn't help but wonder, would she ever comprehend the depths of her treachery? And would the world ever understand the price of deceit? The night was young, and the game of cat and mouse had only just begun. The aftermath of that night's confrontation left a bitter residue that I couldn't wash away even as I drove away under the cloak of darkness. The city's neon glare reflected off the rain-slicked pavement, each puddle mirroring the fractured pieces of my shattered trust and growing determination. I had handed Marianne and her accomplice over to the authorities, or so I thought. Deep down, I knew this was merely the opening move in a game of cat and mouse that was about to escalate into something far more dangerous. Back in the solitude of my study, I replayed every moment of that charged confrontation, the icy glint in Marianne's eyes, the way her arrogance faltered just enough to betray a hint of fear, and that final, almost whispered admission of guilt. All of it was seared into my memory. But as the hours passed, an unsettling thought began to gnaw at the edges of my carefully laid plans. Had I truly neutralized the threat, or had I merely danced with a shadow while the real puppeteer lurked unseen? My suspicions were confirmed by a late-night phone call from an anonymous source. The voice on the other end was low, deliberate, and dripping with a confidence that rivaled my own. "You think you've won, Charles?" it hissed. "You've only scratched the surface. Marianne is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. If you want to see the full picture, meet me at the old textile mill on 7th. And come alone." The line went dead before I could ask any questions, leaving me with more questions and a burning need for answers. The textile mill was a relic from another era, its crumbling facade a testament to neglect and decay. I arrived just as the midnight fog began to settle, wrapping the building in a spectral shroud. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memories of times long past. I moved silently, each step echoing off the barren walls, until I reached a small, dimly lit room. There, a solitary figure waited, a man whose eyes burned with a mixture of regret and resolve. He introduced himself only as Vincent, and his story sent chills down my spine. Vincent had once been entwined with Marianne in a way I had never imagined. Not as a lover, but as a partner in a high-stakes financial scheme that defrauded countless innocent people. Marianne's betrayal wasn't confined to our marriage. She had manipulated me, manipulated the system, and left a trail of destruction in her wake. Vincent, now a broken man seeking redemption, claimed that Mary Ann had planned everything down to the last detail, including using me as an unwitting pawn in her grand design. As Vincent unfolded his tale, the truth emerged with brutal clarity. Mary Ann had been playing both sides, seducing me to divert attention from her real ambitions while orchestrating an elaborate embezzlement operation with a network of corrupt officials. Her lover in the parking lot was merely a distraction, an expendable piece in a scheme far more sinister than I had ever imagined. The realization stung, but it also steeled my resolve. I was not the naive fool she had thought me to be. I was a man awakened to the full scope of her treachery. Vincent handed me a small envelope, its contents a collection of documents, bank statements, and coded messages that detailed Mary Ann's entire operation. "This is the key to exposing her," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and vindication. "But be warned, Charles. Once you step down this path, there's no turning back. She's not just a cheating wife. She's a cold-blooded mastermind, and she won't go down without a fight." Armed with this explosive new evidence, I began to orchestrate a plan of retribution that was as meticulous as it was merciless. I tracked every detail, every transaction, every secret meeting that Mary Ann had held over the past months. The network she had built was vast and deeply rooted in the underbelly of our city's financial world. With each piece of the puzzle that I uncovered, my confidence grew. This wasn't just personal vengeance. It was a crusade against a woman who had betrayed everything I held dear. The next phase of my plan required precision. I arranged a clandestine meeting with one of Mary Ann's trusted associates, a man known only as Cole, whose loyalty to her was unwavering. My objective was to lure him out and force him to spill everything on tape. I met him in a derelict parking garage, its concrete walls stained with decades of grime and secrets. Cole arrived with a swagger that belied the danger in his eyes, unaware that he was stepping into a trap meticulously designed by someone who knew every nuance of betrayal. I confronted him with the evidence Vincent had provided, watching his face twist in recognition and then rapidly contort into panic. "You don't understand," Cole stammered. "She promised me wealth, power, things I've never had. I was in too deep, Charles, I swear." His words, a desperate mixture of lies and half-truths, only fueled my resolve. I needed to break him, to extract every detail about Mary Ann's web of deceit. Using the recorder hidden in my jacket, I interrogated him with a calm, unwavering intensity. His bravado crumbled under the weight of the incontrovertible evidence and my steely gaze. Every confession, every admission of guilt, was captured in cold, unfeeling detail. By the end of our encounter, I had not only a trove of damning evidence but also a chilling confirmation of Mary Ann's true nature, a ruthless orchestrator who left no one unscathed in her quest for power and wealth. As I left the garage, the weight of my mission pressed down on me with a clarity that was both liberating and terrifying. The path ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty, yet I felt more confident than ever. I had the evidence, I had the means, and now I had the moral high ground. Mary Ann's reign of lies was coming to an end, and I was prepared to see justice served in the most unyielding, cold-blooded manner imaginable. The night was far from over, and as I drove away into the foggy darkness, I couldn't help but smile. Revenge was a dish best served ice-cold, and I was about to serve it with all the brutal precision of a man who had been wronged beyond measure. The early dawn crept over the city, its pale light barely breaking through the night's lingering chill. I had returned to my temporary hideaway, a nondescript safe house I'd prepared for moments like these, with the evidence burning a hole in my possession and the echoes of my recent encounters still resonating in my mind. Every whispered confession from Cole and every hushed revelation from Vincent had led me to this precipice, where the line between justice and retribution blurred in the cold glare of truth. As I sat in the dim light of the study, I began assembling the final pieces of Mary Ann's grand deception. The envelope from Vincent, now spread open before me, contained not just transactional records and secret memos, but an ominous blueprint for a financial heist that was set to devastate countless lives, including mine. Mary Ann had meticulously orchestrated a double-cross that extended beyond our marriage, reaching into the highest echelons of power. And now, With every damning detail before me, I knew that my final act of vengeance would be far more than a personal reckoning. It would be a reckoning for all those she had wronged. I reached for the antique phone on the desk, dialing a number I had memorized long ago. "It's time," I said tersely when the line connected. I was speaking to an old adversary turned ally, a man named Marcus, who had spent years dismantling criminal networks from the inside. Marcus had his own score to settle with Marianne's network of deceit. "Prepare everything," I ordered, my voice a mixture of icy calm and unspoken fury. "Tonight, we dismantle her empire piece by piece." The hours passed in a frenetic blur as I meticulously reviewed every recorded conversation and every line of incriminating text. I rewatched the video of Marianne's confrontation in that upscale lounge, every nuance of her shifting expression a reminder of the mask of lies she had worn so effortlessly. There was a distinct moment, a pause, a flicker of hesitation, when she looked directly into the camera, as if acknowledging an unseen audience. Had she always known that I was watching, that I was gathering evidence, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? The thought tightened my grip on the reality that this was a war of wits, where every move was calculated. Then came the unexpected twist. A cryptic email arrived in my secure inbox from an unknown sender, its subject line reading, "The final key." The message was brief, but its contents were explosive. Marianne had been planning an even bigger move, one that would see her embezzling funds from not only corporate giants but also siphoning money from charitable organizations that helped the vulnerable. The document attached detailed a series of transfers and offshore accounts that had long evaded scrutiny. It was the final piece, the damning proof that would not only shatter her carefully constructed facade, but also bring down a network of corrupt officials and businessmen. Realizing the gravity of this new information, I prepared for the next step. I knew that Marianne would never let herself be cornered without a fight. With Marcus's operatives silently infiltrating key locations, I devised a plan to lure her out of the safety of her carefully curated world. I sent a single, untraceable message to her secure line, a challenge wrapped in the guise of reconciliation. "Meet me at the old warehouse on Dockside Pier. Tonight, we settle everything," it read. As dusk began to paint the sky in ominous shades of purple and gray, I drove toward the warehouse. The building stood like a forgotten monument to a bygone era, its weathered exterior concealing secrets and betrayals from years past. I parked a safe distance away, ensuring I had the perfect vantage point to observe every entrance, every shadow that might betray Marianne's arrival. Within minutes, the sound of high heels on cracked pavement announced her presence. Marianne emerged from a sleek black car, her signature air of arrogance intact despite the tension that now coiled around her like a serpent. Her eyes, though still defiant, betrayed a hint of uncertainty when they met mine. I stepped out of my car, each movement deliberate and measured, and approached her through the dim glow of the warehouse lights. "Charles," she greeted, her tone a mixture of forced warmth and underlying scorn. "I wasn't expecting you to show up in person." Her words dripped with a disdain that had become all too familiar, a final attempt to regain control of the narrative. But I had long since seen through her carefully honed act. "Marianne," I replied coolly, my voice echoing in the empty space between us, "tonight, the truth unravels, and there's no more room for your lies." I gestured to the battered doors behind me. "Step inside." With a dismissive scoff, she followed reluctantly, her every step betraying the inner turmoil of a woman who had always been the puppeteer, but now found herself dangling on a fraying thread. As we entered the vast, echoing interior of the warehouse, I activated a series of strategically placed cameras and recording devices. Every word, every gesture would be documented, not just for my satisfaction, but to bring the full measure of her crimes into the unforgiving light of day. I began by presenting the evidence, laying it out like a trail of breadcrumbs that led inexorably to her undoing. "You manipulated lives, ruined fortunes, and betrayed every semblance of trust. All for power and greed," I said, my voice resonating with the cold precision of someone who had seen the darkest parts of human nature. "And now, your empire crumbles." For a long moment, Silence reigned as Marianne's mask faltered. In that silence, I could see her mind racing, her confidence dissolving under the weight of undeniable truth. Yet even as she opened her mouth to speak a desperate defense, I continued, "I've recorded everything, from every deceitful conversation to every hidden transfer. Tonight, you face not just the consequences of our broken marriage, but the reckoning for a network of crimes." At that moment, the warehouse doors burst open. Marcus and his team flooded the space, their presence a stark reminder that no corner of her treachery would remain untouched. In the ensuing chaos, Marianne's bravado crumbled entirely. Her eyes darted around, a mixture of fear and fury igniting within them as she realized the magnitude of the trap she had walked into. I stepped forward, the weight of my resolve solidifying into something almost tangible. "Your final key," I said, holding up the printout of that email, "has unlocked the door to your undoing. There's no escape now." As the room filled with the murmurs of captured conspirators and the harsh commands of Marcus's men, I knew that the downfall of her empire was imminent, and that I, Charles, had become both judge and executioner in this final, brutal chapter. The warehouse was no longer just a stage for confessions. It had become a theater for execution. As Marcus's men corralled the remaining conspirators into a corner, I turned my full attention to Marianne. Her eyes, wide with a blend of fury and disbelief, darted from one shadow to another, desperately seeking an escape that wasn't there. The air was heavy with the scent of stale sweat and impending retribution. "Enough," I said, my voice devoid of any lingering hesitation. There was a finality in my tone that cut through the murmurs of the onlookers. I stepped closer, and the clamor of the warehouse seemed to fall into an eerie silence. Marianne attempted to put on a mask of derision, a haughty smile playing on her lips, but it faltered, replaced by a raw, unguarded terror. "Do you have any more tricks up your sleeve, Marianne?" I asked quietly, the words slicing through the thick tension. "Or is it time to finally admit your truth?" For a fleeting second, her eyes shimmered with a glint of something I hadn't seen before. Regret, perhaps, or the realization that her carefully constructed world was collapsing. She opened her mouth, her voice a shaky whisper laced with indignation. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you've started." I didn't wait for her to continue. The plan I had orchestrated was not one of mere humiliation or exposure. It was a final reckoning, meticulously calculated over months of betrayal. With the cold precision of someone who'd rehearsed this moment endlessly, I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and withdrew a small, gleaming knife. Its polished blade caught the pallid light streaming through broken windows, a silent harbinger of what was about to come. "Your empire, your lies," I murmured, advancing slowly as though savoring every moment, all built on treachery and deceit. Marianne's sneer faltered completely now. Her eyes widened in disbelief, and the defiance that had long characterized her demeanor gave way to something akin to resignation. In that pregnant pause, when the world seemed to contract around us, she finally spoke. Not with the venom of a conspirator, but with the brittle confession of a cornered animal. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. I never meant to hurt you. I did what I had to do." The words tasted bitter on my tongue, a final lie dressed up as a confession. There was no redemption in them, only the futile attempt to cloak the magnitude of her sins. I saw the truth in her eyes. She had betrayed not only my trust but the very sanctity of every promise we had ever shared. The revelation that she had hidden her true nature, even as she spun her web of deceit, fueled the cold fire of my resolve. In one swift, brutal motion, I struck. The blade, an instrument of my own design, found its mark with the chilling precision of a man who had long rehearsed this act in his mind. I pressed it against her chest, feeling the rapid beat of her heart against the unforgiving metal. Her eyes, now wide with the stark terror of impending doom, searched mine for some sign of mercy that I had long since extinguished. "Admit it, Marianne," I hissed, the voice of finality. "Admit every lie, every betrayal, until there's nothing left of the woman you pretended to be." For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to stall. And then, as if all the damning weight of her double life became too unbearable to carry, her facade crumbled entirely. In a strangled, anguished whisper, she spilled the truth. The intricate details of her secret liaisons, the embezzlement schemes, and the lies that had underpinned every interaction between us. It was as if she was clawing at the remnants of her false identity, desperate to make sense of the chaos she had sown. The moment her final confession left her lips, something in me shifted. The knife's cold bite seemed to deepen, as though it were absorbing the full measure of her sins. I could feel every pulse, every heartbeat, a countdown that was both an end and a beginning. And then, with the same swift cruelty that had marked every step of this long, calculated campaign, I drove the blade deeper, ensuring that there would be no further words, no further lies. The sound of a quiet gasp escaped her as she sank to her knees, and I stepped back, my expression impassive despite the storm raging within. Marcus's men maintained a perimeter, their eyes silent witnesses to the culmination of my long-awaited retribution. There was no dramatic flourish in the aftermath, only the stark, brutal reality that this chapter was irrevocably closed. As I looked down at Marianne, her life fading into a silence punctuated by ragged breaths, a final twist emerged that neither of us had anticipated. A small, crumpled note, a remnant of her final, desperate act of defiance, fell from her trembling hand. I retrieved it, my eyes scanning the hastily scribbled words. In that final message, Marianne hinted at an even darker secret, that the network of corruption was far more extensive than I had ever imagined, and that she had been forced into her betrayal by forces far more sinister than mere greed. The note, ambiguous yet damning, hinted that I had only scratched the surface of a labyrinthine conspiracy. Standing amid the wreckage of shattered lives and broken promises, I knew that while Marianne's reign had ended in a burst of cold, calculated violence, the true battle was only just beginning. The note was a grim reminder that every action, every betrayal, led to layers of deception yet to be unraveled. I turned away, the taste of vengeance bitter on my tongue and the weight of her final confession echoing in my mind. This was not the end. It was merely a transition into a deeper, darker pursuit of justice. The empire of lies that Marianne had built would continue to crumble, and I, Charles, would be there to witness every stone fall. The silence after Marianne's final confession hung in the warehouse like a shroud. Even as Marcus's men began processing the scene, carefully collecting evidence, securing the area, I stood still, lost in the labyrinth of my own thoughts. Marianne's crumpled note in my hand was a bitter reminder that her death was only a fraction of the calamity that lay ahead. I couldn't help but replay her trembling words over and over, each syllable hinting at a conspiracy deeper and darker than I had ever imagined. I left the warehouse with the note secured in my inner pocket, my mind churning with questions. Who were these shadowy figures pulling the strings behind Marianne's elaborate web? And what exactly had driven her to betray not only our marriage, but also the countless lives caught in her wake? As I drove through the awakening city, the neon glow of the night giving way to the uncertain promise of dawn, I realized that the empire of corruption she had been a part of extended far beyond our lives. It was an insidious network, an intricate tapestry of lies, money laundering, and collusion with influential figures who operated in the dark recesses of society. My first stop was a discreet safe house nestled in an abandoned industrial complex on the city's outskirts, a place I'd used before to plan my next moves. There, in the solitude of a barren room, I spread out every scrap of evidence I had painstakingly accumulated over the months. Among the recordings, bank statements, and encrypted emails, Marianne's note was the most disturbing of all. Scribbled in shaky handwriting, it mentioned a Project Prometheus and referenced several high-profile names I recognized only vaguely from whispered conversations in the corridors of power. I couldn't dismiss it as the desperate ramblings of a dying woman. It was a final, calculated message, a breadcrumb trail pointing toward a hidden nexus of corruption. Determined to follow the trail, I began cross-referencing every piece of evidence with the names in Marianne's note. Late into the night, my computer screen became a mosaic of interlinked names, bank accounts, offshore companies, and encrypted messages. With every keystroke, I felt the walls of her empire crumble a little more. Yet, the deeper I delved, the more I realized that I was dealing with adversaries who thrived in shadows. These were men and women who wielded power without accountability, who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. A knock at the door startled me from my grim analysis. I glanced up to see Vincent standing there, his expression etched with equal parts concern and urgency. "Charles," he said quietly, "I've been tracking communications that suggest this network isn't just about money. It's about control. Marianne wasn't the mastermind. She was one of many. There's a man known only as the architect who orchestrates everything from behind a veil of anonymity." His revelation sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I had thought my vendetta against Marianne was the culmination of my pursuit of justice, but now it was clear that I'd inadvertently stepped into a far larger game. "The architect," I repeated slowly, the name echoing in my mind like a sinister mantra. "Do you have any idea who he is or where he operates?" Vincent shook his head. "Not precisely. All I know is that his influence runs deep, spanning multiple sectors: finance, politics, even law enforcement. Marianne's note is just the tip of the iceberg. We need to act fast before he realizes you're onto him." The urgency in Vincent's voice was a stark reminder that time was no longer on my side. I decided that the next step was to confront one of Marianne's most trusted lieutenants, an enigmatic figure known in hushed circles as Raven. Raven had been responsible for laundering Marianne's ill-gotten gains and was rumored to have access to the highest levels of the network. Tracking him down would be dangerous, but it was a risk I was willing to take. Over the next few days, I operated in the shadows, blending into the city's underbelly as I pieced together Raven's whereabouts. A chance tip led me to an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district, a perfect hideout for someone who preferred anonymity over opulence. With a mixture of determination and steely resolve, I infiltrated the location under the cover of darkness, every nerve in my body alert to the possibility of ambush. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of rusted machinery and dark corners. I moved silently, the memory of Marianne's final moments fueling my every step. It wasn't long before I found Raven, a man whose cold, calculating eyes revealed a lifetime of secrets. When our gazes met, there was an unspoken understanding. We were both players in a game where the stakes were nothing less than the soul of this corrupted empire. "Raven," I said, my tone deceptively calm, "I'm not here for small talk. I want answers." His response was a measured smile, but the glint in his eyes betrayed a hint of wariness. "And what makes you think you deserve any?" he replied, his voice smooth as silk yet edged with danger. Before I could press further, the unmistakable sound of footsteps and hushed voices reached my ears, a signal that our clandestine meeting had been compromised. I cursed under my breath and quickly pressed the recorder into my hand. "I'm aware that your boss, the architect, won't allow any loose ends," I whispered, trying to use the threat to my advantage. "You can help me dismantle this network, or you can watch as everything you've built crumbles." Raven's eyes narrowed as he weighed his options, his face a mask of conflict. For a moment, I thought he might cooperate, but then a hidden door creaked open behind him. A cadre of men in dark suits emerged, their expressions void of emotion, a stark reminder that I was far outnumbered. In a swift, brutal exchange that left me reeling from the force of their assault, I managed to slip away, my mind racing with both adrenaline and grim determination. In the chaos of that failed encounter, one undeniable truth crystallized. My quest for vengeance had evolved into a mission to expose a monstrous network that had ensnared not just Marianne and me, but countless unsuspecting souls. As I staggered into the cool night air, battered but unbowed, I vowed to continue this crusade. Every lie, every corrupt transaction, every hidden connection would be unearthed, and the architect, this elusive puppet master, would eventually be forced into the light. Clutching the remnants of Marianne's note and a few hastily salvaged documents from Raven's fallen files, I merged back into the urban sprawl, each step a defiant declaration against the corruption that had infiltrated every corner of my world. The game had changed, and with it, my purpose had become singular: to dismantle the empire of deceit piece by piece, no matter how deep or dangerous the roots may be. The city pulsed around me, indifferent to the personal vendetta that now threatened its underbelly. But I was no longer just a betrayed husband. I had become an avenger, an instrument of cold, calculated justice in a world where the stakes were higher than ever before. And as I vanished into the night, one thought resonated with unwavering clarity. The deeper I dug, the closer I came to a truth that would shatter everything. I managed to vanish into the labyrinth of back alleys and darkened corners of the city, every step pulsating with the raw adrenaline of near death. The failed encounter with Raven had left me with more questions than answers, and a burning urgency to uncover the architect's identity. My mind raced as I navigated the urban maze, piecing together clues from the salvaged documents and fragments of Raven's files. Each torn page, each half-erased signature hinted at a level of deceit that stretched far beyond Marianne's personal betrayal. I retreated to a safe house tucked away in an unremarkable building on the edge of the city. There, I spread out everything on a scarred wooden table: bank statements, encrypted emails, and the cryptic note Marianne had scribbled in her final moments. It mentioned Project Prometheus and linked several names, none of which I recognized, except one, a financier known in hush circles as Silver. Silver was rumored to be a middleman for high-level illicit transactions. Could he be a key to unraveling this network? Determined to follow the thread, I reached out to an old contact in the world of cyber investigation, a brilliant, if reclusive, hacker known as Nix. I recalled how Nix's unparalleled skill had once salvaged me from a corporate scandal. I made the call using a secure line, outlining the fragments of evidence I had gathered. Within minutes, Nix's voice crackled through the speaker, laced with both skepticism and intrigue. Project Prometheus, Silver, and the architect? Nix repeated slowly. Charles, if you're in this deep, be careful. I can trace digital footprints, but the deeper you go, the more dangerous it gets. Meet me at the old transit station tonight. We need to go digital. Under the cloak of twilight, I made my way to the deserted station, a relic from a bygone era, its platforms echoing with memories of faded glory. There, hidden in a corner of a disused ticket booth, I found Nix. With quick, surreptitious gestures, he set up his portable rig. His fingers danced over the keyboard, tapping into dark webs and secure servers with a precision that bordered on artistry. There, he said after a few intense minutes, eyes narrowing as he stared at the screen. I've traced an encrypted transaction. It's a high-value transfer, too big to be nothing, going to an account registered under the name Silver. It's linked to several offshore accounts and a series of shell companies. I'm also picking up chatter about a clandestine meeting scheduled at an upscale club tomorrow night. It could be where Silver and his cohorts, possibly even the architect, plan their next move. The revelation hit me like a blow. This wasn't just about a disgraced wife or a personal vendetta. It was a systemic rot that reached into the highest echelons of power. Every piece of evidence was like a stepping stone leading to a showdown that was far bigger than I had imagined. With renewed determination, I thanked Nix and prepared for tomorrow's meeting. I knew that confronting these shadowy figures would be dangerous, but it was a risk I was willing to take. The night was long and sleepless as I reviewed every detail, revisiting each encrypted message and cross-referencing every name with painstaking care. The intensity of betrayal still simmered within me, fueling my resolve. I recalled Marianne's final moments in the warehouse, her confession, her last desperate scribbled note, and felt a cold satisfaction that, for the first time, I was turning her own tools against her. I wasn't merely avenging a broken marriage. I was dismantling an empire of corruption from the inside out. Morning crept in with an ominous promise as I prepared for the upscale club rendezvous. I adopted a new identity for the night, one that would allow me to blend into the crowd without raising suspicion. Dressed sharply and armed with a resolve as unyielding as steel, I entered the club. The environment was an intoxicating mix of opulence and decadence. Polished marble floors, low-lit chandeliers, and patrons whose conversations hinted at secrets too dangerous for the daylight. I navigated through the crowd like a shadow, eyes scanning for any sign of Silver or his cohorts. In a dimly lit, private lounge, I spotted him. A man with a silvered smile and eyes that betrayed nothing. Silver sat at a table with a small group of sharply dressed individuals, their laughter and casual demeanor a stark contrast to the gravity of their covert dealings. I knew this was my chance to gather more intelligence. Approaching with the confident stride of a man who had nothing left to lose, I introduced myself as a potential investor interested in Project Prometheus. The name hung in the air like a forbidden incantation. Silver's eyes flickered with a mix of surprise and calculation. "I'm not in the habit of entertaining amateurs," he replied coolly, his tone implying that every word he uttered was measured. But as we engaged in conversation, it became apparent that beneath his polished exterior lay a network of secrets and, perhaps, a vulnerability that I could exploit. Every carefully chosen word and subtle gesture was a piece of the puzzle I was desperate to solve. I probed gently, letting my curiosity disguise my intent, while my mind worked furiously to connect the dots between Marianne's betrayal, Silver's network, and the elusive figure known only as the architect. As the conversation deepened, I sensed that Silver was beginning to underestimate me, a mistake that could prove fatal. The tension in the room grew palpable, and I realized that every moment was a balancing act between gathering information and maintaining my cover. My pulse quickened as Silver mentioned a high-stakes meeting scheduled for later that week, a gathering that promised to solidify the inner circle of this corrupt empire. My instincts screamed that this meeting would be the key to unmasking the architect. Before I could extract further details, a subtle hand on my shoulder and a hushed voice behind me warned, "Not so fast, stranger." I turned sharply to find a man with a stern expression and unmistakable authority. It was one of Silver's lieutenants, a silent enforcer whose presence spoke volumes of the dangers that lurked within this world. With a barely perceptible nod, Silver excused himself, leaving me alone with the enforcer who eyed me with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. In that charged moment, I realized that the game was about to escalate further. The stakes had risen beyond personal revenge. I was now entangled in a web of deceit and corruption that threatened not just my world, but the very fabric of the institution that had betrayed countless innocents. My next move would be critical. One misstep could not only expose me, but also jeopardize everything I had fought for. I clutched my phone and sent a secure message to Nix, urging him to monitor any further communications regarding the meeting. With every fiber of my being, I vowed that I would dismantle this network, piece by piece, until even the architect had nowhere left to hide. As I sat back, the heavy bass of the club's music echoing the pounding of my heart, I knew that the next few days would determine the course of a revolution, one where betrayal and deception would be met with a relentless, unforgiving reckoning.